show in his house. Let me make sure you guys have a comfortable seat. And without further ado, welcome back. Thank you for joining me in this Russian author series. Thank you for watching. Thank you for the follows on Twitch, the subs on YouTube. Yada yada yada. Okay. If I can grow my audience, I may change the format of these just chattings to resemble more of like a Q&A. Or just more casual, like reacting, stuff like that. But time will tell whether or not this stream ever grows or shows any kind of progress. Stinking Twitch. Alright, here we go. Chapter 5. We might want to start with War and Peace and then head into Crime and Punishment. Because it seems to me that Crime and Punishment of the two books is easier to follow what's happening, and it makes for a more interesting reading, in my opinion. So I think it's a better conclusion. Today I will have a Phoenix Wright stream, and I'll also have a fitness mindfulness read aloud combo to wrap up the day. That fitness stream will probably be closer to 10 o'clock tonight, I'm thinking. So stay tuned for that. Okay. Yeah, I might even have a music and art stream planned sometime this week, I'll say. Will have to be a surprise, I guess. Alright, Chapter 9. The day after the review, Boris, in his best uniform and with his comrade Berg's best wishes for success, rode to Olmutz to see Bolkonsky, wishing to profit by his friendliness and obtain for himself the best post he could, preferably that of adjutant to some important personage, position in the army which seemed to him most attractive. It is all very well for Rostov, whose father sends him 10,000 rubles at a time, to talk about not wishing to cringe to anybody and not be anybody's lackey. But I, who have nothing but my brains, have to make a career. I must not miss opportunities, but must avail myself of them, he reflected. He did not find Prince Andrew in Olmutz that day, but the appearance of the town where the headquarters and the diplomatic corps were stationed and the two emperors were living with their suites, households, and courts only strengthened his desire to belong to that higher world. He knew no one, and despite his smart guardsman's uniform, all these exalted personages passing in the streets in their elegant carriages with their plumes, ribbons, and medals, both courtiers and military men seemed so immeasurably above him, an insignificant officer of the guards, that they not only did not wish to, but simply could not be aware of his existence. It's like they're just like a bunch of people there. At the quarters of the commander-in-chief, Kutuzov, where he inquired for Bolkonsky, all the adjutants and even the orderlies looked at him as if they wished to impress on him that a great many officers like him were always coming there and that everybody was heartily sick of them. In spite of this, or rather because of it, next day, November 15th, after dinner he again went to Olmutz. Entering the house occupied by Kutuzov, asked for Bolkonsky. Prince Andrew was in, and Boris was shown into a large hall, probably formerly used for dancing, but in which 5 beds now stood. Furniture of various kinds. A table, chairs, and a clavichord. Clavichord's like a piano-type instrument, as I recall. I think we actually looked at it before, yeah. It's a keyboard-type instrument. One adjutant nearest the door was sitting at the table in a Persian dressing gown, writing. Another, the red stout Nesvitsky, lay on a bed with his arms under his head, laughing with an officer who had sat down beside him. The third was playing a Viennese waltz on the clavichord, while a fourth, lying on the clavichord, sang the tune. Bolkonsky was not there. None of these gentlemen changed his position on seeing Boris. The one who was writing and whom Boris addressed turned round crossly and told him Bolkonsky was on duty and that he should go through the door on the left into the reception room if he wished to see him. Boris thanked him and went to the reception room, where he found some 10 officers and generals. When he entered, Prince Andrew, his eyes drooping contemptuously, with that peculiar expression and polite weariness which plainly says, "If it were not my duty, I would not talk to you for a moment," was listening to an old Russian general with decorations, who stood very erect, almost on tiptoe, with a soldier's obsequious expression on his purple face, reporting something. "Very well, then, be so good as to wait," said Prince Andrew to the general, in Russian, speaking with the French intonation he affected when he wished to speak contemptuously. And noticing Boris, Prince Andrew, paying no more heed to the general, who ran after him, imploring him to hear something more, nodded and turned to him with a cheerful smile. At that moment, Boris clearly realized what he had before surmised, that in the army, besides the subordination and discipline prescribed in the military code, which he and others knew in the regiment, there was another more important subordination, which made this tight-laced, purple-faced general wait respectfully while Captain Prince Andrew, for his own pleasure, chose to chat with Lieutenant Drbutsky. More than ever was Boris resolved to serve in future not according to the written code, but under this unwritten law. He felt now that merely by having been recommended to Prince Andrew, he had already risen above the general, who at the front had the power to annihilate him, a lieutenant of the guards. Prince Andrew came up to him and took his hand. "I'm very sorry you did not find me yesterday. I was fussing about with Germans all day. We went with Weyrother to survey the dispositions. When Germans start being accurate, there's no end to it." Boris smiled as if he understood what Prince Andrew was alluding to as something generally known. But it was the first time he had heard Weyrother's name, or even the term dispositions. "Well, my dear fellow, so you still want to be an adjutant. I've been thinking about you." "Yes, I was thinking," for some reason Boris could not help blushing, "of asking the commander-in-chief. He's had a letter from Prince Kurgan about me. I only wanted to ask because I fear the guards won't be in action," he added as if in apology. All right, we'll talk it over," replied Prince Andrew. "Only let me report this gentleman's business, and I shall be at your disposal." While Prince Andrew went to report about the purple-faced general, that gentleman, evidently not sharing Boris's conception of the advantages of the unwritten code of subordination, looked so fixedly at the presumptuous lieutenant who had prevented his finishing what he had to say to the adjutant that Boris felt uncomfortable. I'm not sure what he means purple-faced either. Like, if I'm purple-faced, it's probably because I'm running out of air. But I guess this general looks that way all the time. I don't know. I can only glean as much from what Leo's written. He turned away and waited impatiently for Prince Andrew's return from the commander-in-chief's room. "You see, my dear fellow, I've been thinking about you," said Prince Andrew, when they had gone into the large room where the clavichord was. "It's no use your going to the commander-in-chief. He would say a lot of pleasant things, ask you to dinner. That would not be as bad as regards the unwritten code," thought Boris, "but nothing more would come of it. There will soon be a battalion of us aides-de-camp and adjutants. But this is what we'll do. I have a good friend, an adjutant general and an excellent fellow, Prince Dolgorukov. Though you may not know it, the fact is that now Kutuzov with his staff and all of us count for nothing. Everything is now centered around the Emperor, so we will go to Dolgorukov. I have to go there anyhow, and I have already spoken to him about you. We shall see whether he cannot attach you to himself or find a place for you somewhere nearer the sun." Prince Andrew always became especially keen when he had to guide a young man and help him to worldly success. Under cover of obtaining help of this kind for another, which from pride he would never accept for himself. He kept in touch with a circle which confers success and which attracted him. He very readily took up Boris's cause and went with him to Dolgorukov. It was late in the evening when they entered the palace at Olmutz, occupied by the emperors and their retinues. That same day, a council of war had been held in which all the members of Holgersgath. Oh, okay. Hold on a second. Hofkriegsgrath. It's the Austro-Hungarian Ministry of War, I guess. The predecessor to that. Okay. It's definitely hard enough to say. At that council, contrary to the views of the old generals Kutuzov and Prince Schwarzenberg, it had been decided to advance immediately and give battle to Bonaparte. The council of war was just over when Prince Andrew, accompanied by Boris, arrived at the palace to find Dolgorukov. Everyone at headquarters was still under the spell of the day's council, at which the party of the young had triumphed. The voices of those who counseled delay and advised waiting for something else before advancing had been so completely silenced, and their arguments confuted by such conclusive evidence of the advantages of attacking, that what had been discussed at the council, the coming battle and the victory that would certainly result from it, no longer seemed to be in the future but in the past. All the advantages were on our side. Our enormous forces, undoubtedly superior to Napoleon's, were concentrated in one place. The troops inspired by the emperor's presence were eager for action. The strategic position where the operations would take place was familiar in all its details to the Austrian General Weyrother. Lucky accident had ordained that the Austrian army should maneuver the previous year on the very fields where the French had now to be fought. The adjacent locality was known and shown in every detail on the maps, and Bonaparte, evidently weakened, was undertaking nothing. Dolgorukov, one of the warmest advocates of an attack, had just returned from the council, tired and exhausted, but eager and proud of the victory that had been gained. Prince Andrew introduced his protege, but Prince Dolgorukov, politely and firmly pressing his hand, said nothing to Boris, and evidently unable to suppress the thoughts which were uppermost in his mind at that moment, addressed Prince Andrew in French. "Ah, my dear fellow, what a battle we've gained. God grant that the one that will result from it will be as victorious. However, dear fellow," he said abruptly and eagerly, "I must confess to have been unjust to the Austrians, and especially to Weyrother. What exactitude, what minuteness, what knowledge of the locality, what foresight for every eventuality, every possibility even to the smallest detail. No, my dear fellow, no conditions better than our present ones could have been devised. The combination of Austrian precision with Russian valor, what more could be wished for?" "So the attack is definitely resolved on?" asked Bolkonsky. "And do you know, my dear fellow, it seems to me that Bonaparte has decidedly lost bearings. You know that a letter was received from him today for the emperor." Dolgorukov smiled significantly. "Is that so? And what did he say?" inquired Bolkonsky. "What can he say? Tradira, dira, and so on, merely to gain time. I tell you he's in our hands, that's certain. Pride always comes before the fall, by the way. But what was most amusing," he continued with a sudden good-natured laugh, "was that we could not think how to address the reply. If not as consul, and of course not as emperor, it seemed to me it should be to General Bonaparte. But between not recognizing him as emperor and calling him General Bonaparte, there is a difference," remarked Bolkonsky. "That's just it," interrupted Dolgorukov quickly, laughing. "You know Bilibin, he's a very clever fellow. He suggested addressing him as a usurper and enemy of mankind." Dolgorukov laughed merrily. "Only that," said Bolkonsky. "All the same, it was Bilibin who found a suitable form for the address. He's a wise and clever fellow." "What was it?" "To the head of the French government." Ah, chef du government Francois, said Dolgorukov with grave satisfaction. Good, wasn't it? Yes, but he will dislike it extremely, said Volkonsky. Oh yes, very much. My brother knows him. He's dined with him, the present emperor, more than once in Paris, and tells me he never met a more cunning or subtle diplomatist. You know, a combination of French adroitness and Italian play acting. Do you know the tale about him and Count Markov? Count Markov was the only man who knew how to handle him. You know the story of the handkerchief. It's delightful. And the talkative Dolgorukov, turning now to Boris, now to Prince Andrew, told how Bonaparte, wishing to test Markov, our ambassador, purposely dropped a handkerchief in front of him and stood looking at Markov, probably expecting Markov to pick it up for him, and how Markov immediately dropped his own beside it and picked it up without touching Bonaparte's. Delightful, said Bolkonsky, but I've come to see you, Prince. As a petitioner on behalf of this young man. You see. But before Prince Andrew could finish, an aide-de-camp came and summoned Dolgorukov to the emperor. Oh, what a nuisance, said Dolgorukov, getting up hurriedly and pressing the hands of Prince Andrew and Boris. You know, I should be very glad to do all my power, both for you and for this dear young man. Again he pressed the hand of the latter with an expression of good-natured, sincere, and animated levity. But you see, another time. Boris was excited by the thought of being so close to the high powers as he felt himself to be at that moment. He was conscious that there he was in contact with the springs that set in motion the enormous movements of the mass, of which in his regiment he felt himself a tiny, obedient, and insignificant atom. They followed Prince Dolgorukov out into the corridor and met coming out of the door of the Emperor's room, by which Dolgorukov had entered, short man in civilian clothes with a clever face and sharply projecting jaw, which, without spoiling his face, gave him a peculiar vivacity and shiftiness of expression. The short man nodded to Dolgorukov as to an intimate friend, and stared at Prince Andrew with cool intensity, walking straight toward him and evidently expecting him to bow or to step out of his way. Prince Andrew did neither. A look of animosity appeared on his face, and the other turned away, went down the side of the corridor. Who was that? Asked Boris. He's one of the most remarkable, but to me the most unpleasant of men, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Prince Adam Czartoryski. It's such men as he who decide the fate of nations, added Bolkonsky with a sigh he could not suppress, as they passed out of the palace. Next day the army began its campaign, up to the very battle of Austerlitz. Boris was unable to see either Prince Andrew or Dolgorukov again and remained for a while with the Izmailov regiment. Okay, next time we'll be in chapter 10. The entire chapter is basically battle preparations. The next chapter might also be purely battle preparations. It might be a good, 3 or 4 chapters before we get to the Battle of Three Emperors. Okay, chapter 5. Crime and Punishment. The next morning at 11 o'clock, punctually, Raskolnikov went into the Department of the Investigation of Criminal Causes and sent his name in to Porfiry Petrovich. He was surprised at being kept waiting so long. It was at least 10 minutes before he was summoned. He'd expected that they would pounce upon him, but he stood in the waiting room, and people who apparently had nothing to do with him were continually passing to and fro before him. In the next room, which looked like an office, several clerks were sitting writing, and obviously they had no notion who or what Raskolnikov might be. He looked uneasily and suspiciously about him to see whether there was not some guard, some mysterious watch being kept on him to prevent his escape. There was nothing of the sort. He saw only the faces of clerks absorbed in petty details, then other people, and no one seemed to have any concern with him. He might go where he liked for them. The conviction grew stronger in him that if that enigmatic man of yesterday, that phantom sprung out of the earth, had seen everything, they would not have let him stand and wait like that. Would they have waited till he elected to appear at 11? Either the man had not yet given information, or simply he knew nothing, had seen nothing, and how could he have seen anything? And so all that happened to him the day before was again a phantom exaggerated by his sick and overstrained imagination. This conjecture had begun to grow strong the day before, in the midst of all his alarm and despair. Thinking it all over now and preparing for a fresh conflict, he was suddenly aware that he was trembling. And he felt a rush of indignation at the thought that he was trembling with fear facing that hateful Porfiry Petrovich. I believe Porfiry Petrovich is the detective, I think, on the case, the double murder case, I'm pretty sure. It's a little bit confusing because there is a Peter Petrovich, which is Luzhin, Dunia's ex-fiance. And there's Porfiry Petrovich, who's with the police department. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's a detective. What he dreaded above all was meeting that man again. He hated him with an intense, unmitigated hatred, and was afraid his hatred might betray him. His indignation was such that he ceased trembling at once. He made ready to go in with a cold and arrogant bearing, and vowed to himself to keep as silent as possible, to watch and listen, and for once at least to control his overstrained nerves. At that moment he was summoned to Porfiry Petrovich. I feel it kind of strange how some people who break the law direct their anger and frustration at law enforcement instead of where it should be with themselves. Like, you murdered two people. Is it really Porfiry Petrovich's fault? No, he's just trying to do his job. He found Porfiry Petrovich alone in his study. All of this, what's it called? Hatred should be self-loathing. For some people it is, but for others it's not. His study was a room neither large nor small, furnished with a large writing table that stood before a sofa, upholstered in checked material, a bureau, a bookcase in the corner, and several chairs, all government furniture, of polished yellow wood. In the further wall there was a closed door. Beyond it there were no doubt other rooms. On Raskolnikov's entrance, Porfiry Petrovich had at once closed the door by which he had come in, and they remained alone. He met his visitor with an apparent genial and good-tempered air. It was only after a few minutes that Raskolnikov saw signs of a certain awkwardness in him, as though he had been thrown out of his reckoning or caught in something very secret. "Ah, my dear fellow, here you are, in our domain," began Porfiry, holding out both hands to him. "Come, sit down, old man. Or perhaps you don't like to be called my dear fellow, an old man. Tout court. Please don't think it too familiar. Here, on the sofa." Raskolnikov sat down, keeping his eyes fixed on him. "In our domain." The apologies for familiarity, the French phrase tout court, were all characteristic signs. He held out both hands to me, but he did not give me one. He drew it back in time. Struck him suspiciously. Both were watching each other, but when their eyes met, quick as lightning, they looked away. "I brought you this paper about the watch. Here it is. Is it all right, or shall I copy it again?" "What, a paper? Yes, don't be uneasy. It's all right," Porfiry Petrovich said as though in haste. And after he said it, he took the paper and looked at it. "Yes, it's all right. Nothing more is needed," he declared with the same rapidity, and he laid the paper on the table. A minute later, when he was talking of something else, he took it from the table and put it on his bureau. "I believe you said yesterday you would like to question me formally about my acquaintance with the murdered woman." Raskolnikov was beginning again. Why did I put in "I believe" passed through his mind in a flash. Why am I so uneasy at having put in that "I believe" came in a second flash. He suddenly felt that his uneasiness at the mere contact with Porfiry, at the first words, at the first looks, had grown in an instant to monstrous proportions, and this was fearfully dangerous. His nerves were quivering, his emotion was increasing. It's bad, it's bad. I shall say too much again. Yes, 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 there is no hurry, there is no hurry, muttered Porfiry Petrovitch, moving to and fro about the table without any apparent aim, as it were making dashes towards the window, the barrel on the table, at one moment avoiding Raskolnikov's suspicious glance, then again standing still and looking him straight in the face. His fat, round little figure looked very strange, like a ball rolling from one side to the other, and rebounding back. "We've plenty of time. Do you smoke? Have you your own? Here, a cigarette." He went on, offering his visitor a cigarette. "You know I'm receiving you here, but my own quarters are through there. You know, my government quarters. But I'm living outside for the time. I had to have some repairs done here. It's almost finished now. Government quarters, you know, are a capital thing." "What do you think?" "Yes, a capital thing," answered Raskolnikov, looking at him almost ironically. Capital thing," repeated Porfiry Petrovitch, as though he just thought of something quite different. "Yes, a capital thing," he almost shouted at last, suddenly staring at Raskolnikov and stopping 2 short steps from him. This stupid repetition was too incongruous in its ineptitude with the serious, brooding and enigmatic glance he turned upon his visitor. Let's see, incongruous, not in harmony or keeping with the surroundings or their aspects of something, so it just didn't match. Yeah, I don't know, maybe he's trying to like throw Raskolnikov off or something. He's like, "Yes, a capital thing." Ah, yes, capital, like we're back in the UK. But this stirred Raskolnikov's spleen more than ever, and he could not resist an ironical and rather incautious challenge. "Tell me more, please," he asked suddenly, looking almost insolently at him and taking a kind of pleasure in his own insolence. He's like, "Dude, tell me more about the lodgings here." "I believe it's sort of a legal rule, a sort of legal tradition for all investigating lawyers." Okay, yeah, he's a lawyer, I guess. "To begin their attack from afar, the trivial or at least an irrelevant subject, so as to encourage or rather to divert the man they are cross-examining, to disarm his caution, and then all at once to give him an unexpected knockdown blow with some fatal question. Isn't that so? It's a sacred tradition mentioned, I fancy, in all the manuals of the art." Yes, yes, why do you imagine that was why I spoke about government quarters, huh?" And as he said this, Porfiry Petrovitch screwed up his eyes and winked. A good-humored, crafty look passed over his face. The wrinkles on his forehead were smoothed out, his eyes contracted, his features broadened, and he suddenly went off into a nervous, prolonged laugh, shaking all over and looking Raskolnikov straight in the face. The latter forced himself to laugh too, but when Porfiry, seeing that he was laughing, broke into such a guffaw that he turned almost crimson. Raskolnikov's repulsion overcame all precaution. He left off laughing, scowled, and stared with hatred at Porfiry, keeping his eyes fixed on him while his intentionally prolonged laughter lasted. There was lack of precaution on both sides, however, for Porfiry Petrovitch seemed to be laughing in his visitor's face and to be very little disturbed at the annoyance with which the visitor received it. The latter fact was very significant in Raskolnikov's eyes. He saw that Porfiry Petrovitch had not been embarrassed just before either, but that he, Raskolnikov, had perhaps fallen into a trap, that there must be something, some motive here unknown to him, that perhaps everything was in readiness and in another moment would break upon him. At least one of them knows that Raskolnikov's a double murderer, so there's that. Alright, gotta use the bathroom, I'll be right back. try to fit in Hearthstone stream in here, either before or after the Phoenix Wright stream videos. And I'm thinking, I might even try starting up like a new series like Fallout 76, but yeah, as always, just let me know if you have a preference. Okay. He went straight to the point at once, rose from his seat and took his cap. Porfiry Petrovich, he began resolutely, though with considerable irritation. Yesterday you expressed a desire that I should come to you for some inquiries. He laid special stress on the word inquiries. I have come, and if you have anything to ask me, ask it, and if not, allow me to withdraw. I have no time to spare. I have to be at the funeral of that man who was run over, of whom you know also, he added, feeling angry at once at having made this addition and more irritated at his anger. I'm sick of it all, do you hear? And have long been. It's partly what made me ill. In short, he shouted, feeling that the phrase about his illness was still more out of place. In short, kindly examine me or let me go at once. I would be able to like sympathize, I think, more with Raskolnikov if he wasn't like a psycho. Basically, like, you killed 2 people, you probably should feel bad about that. I think this is the reason why there are so many serial killers, because some people who kill don't see what they've done wrong. They're like, oh, it makes me feel good, that's all that counts. Like, okay. Alright, where was I? I will not allow you to do so otherwise, and so meanwhile, goodbye. As we've evidently nothing to keep us now. Good heavens, what do you mean? What shall I question you about? Cackled Porfiry Petrovich with a change of tone, instantly leaving off laughing. Please don't disturb yourself. He began fidgeting from place to place and fussily making Raskolnikov sit down. There's no hurry, it's all nonsense. Oh no, I'm very glad you've come to see me at last. I look upon you simply as a visitor. And as for my confounded laughter, please excuse it, Rodion Romanovich. Rodion Romanovich? That is your name. It's my nerves. You tickle me so with your witty observation. I assure you, sometimes I shake with laughter, like an india rubber ball, for half an hour at a time. I am often afraid of an attack of paralysis. Do sit down, please do, or I shall think you are angry. Raskolnikov did not speak. He listened, watching him still frowning angrily. He had sit down, but still held his cap. I must tell you one thing about myself, my dear Rodion Romanovich, Porfiry Petrovich continued, moving about the room and again avoiding his visitor's eyes. You see, I'm a bachelor, a man of no consequence, and I'm not used to society. Besides, I have nothing before me. I'm set. I'm running to seed, and have you noticed, Rodion Romanovich, that in our Petersburg circles, if 2 clever men meet who are not intimate but respect each other, like you and me, it takes them half an hour before they can find a subject for conversation. They're dumb. They sit opposite each other and feel awkward. Everyone has subjects of conversation. Ladies, for instance. People in high society always have their subjects of conversation. C'est de rigueur. Let me see if I can look this up. Let me try the web. Per custom. I think that's what it means. Yeah. So it's social way. But people of the middle sort like us, thinking people that is, are always tongue-tied and awkward. I think that's kind of because it's like looking at a very complex picture sometimes. Like, highly intelligent people sometimes can't think of what to say because there's so much information. Like, it's hard to say where to start, right? Yeah, I don't know. What's the reason of it? Whether it's a lack of public interest, or whether it is we are so honest we don't want to deceive one another, I don't know. What do you think? Do you put down your cap? It looks as though you were just going. Do put down your cap. It looks as if you were just going. It makes me uncomfortable. I am so delighted. Raskolnikov put down his cap and continued listening in silence with a serious frowning face to the vague and empty chatter of Porfiry Petrovitch. Does he really want to distract my attention with his silly babble? I can't offer you coffee here, but why not spend 5 minutes with a friend? Porfiry pattered on. And you know all these official duties. Please don't mind my running up and down. Excuse it, my dear fellow. I'm very much afraid of offending you, but exercise is absolutely indispensable for me. I'm always sitting down and so glad to be moving about for 5 minutes. I suffer from my sedentary life. I always intend to join a gymnasium. Yeah, we're kind of alike that way. I never actually... I haven't joined any gyms. I'm not sure I will either, but... maybe if I ever get tired of working out at home. They say that officials of all ranks, even privy councillors, have maybe seen skipping gaily here. There you have it, modern science. Yes, yes, but as for my duties here, inquiries and all such formalities. You mentioned inquiries yourself just now. I assure you these interrogations are sometimes more embarrassing for the interrogator than for the interrogated. You made the observation yourself just now very aptly and wittily. Raskolnikov had made no observation of the kind. One gets into a muddle, a regular muddle. One keeps harping on the same note like a drum. There is to be a reform, and we shall be called by a different name, at least. As for our legal tradition, as you so wittily called it, I thoroughly agree with you. Every prisoner on trial, even the rudest peasant, knows that they begin by disarming him with irrelevant questions, as you so happily put it. Then deal him a knockdown blow. Your felicitous comparison. So you really imagine that I meant by government quarters. You are an ironical person. Come, I won't go on. By the way, yes, one word leads to another. You spoke of formality just now. I propose of the inquiry, you know. But what's the use of formality? In many cases, it's nonsense. Sometimes one has a friendly chat and gets a good deal more out of it. One can always fall back on formality, allow me to assure you. After all, what does it amount to? An examining lawyer cannot be bounded by formality at every step. The work of investigation is, so to speak, a free art in its own way. Porfiry Petrovitch took breath a moment. He had simply babbled on, uttering empty phrases, letting slip a few enigmatic words and again reverting to incoherence. He was almost running about the room, moving his fat little legs quicker and quicker, looking at the ground with his right hand behind his back, while his left making gesticulations that were extraordinarily incongruous with his words. Raskolnikov suddenly noticed that, as he ran about the room, he seemed twice to stop for a moment near the door, as though he were listening. Is he expecting anything? You're certainly quite right about it, Porfiry began gaily, looking with extraordinary simplicity at Raskolnikov, which startled him and instantly put him on his guard. Certainly quite right in laughing so wittily at our legal forms. Some of these elaborate psychological methods are exceedingly ridiculous and perhaps useless, if one adheres too closely to the forms. Yes, I'm talking of forms again. Like some government employee. It doesn't actually say that, I added that. Well, if I recognize it, more strictly speaking, if I suspect someone or other to be a criminal in any case, entrust it to me. You're reading for the law, of course, Rodion Romanovich. Yes, I was. Well, then it is a precedent for you for the future, though don't suppose I should venture to instruct you after the articles you publish about crime. No, I simply make bold to state it by the way of fact. If I took this man or that for a criminal, why, I ask, should I worry him prematurely, even though I had evidence against him? In one case, I may be bound, for instance, to arrest a man at once, but another may be in quite a different position. So why shouldn't I let him walk about the town a bit? Builds the suspense. Probably because there's a pattern in behavior, right, Porphyry? You don't want to give them too much wiggle room, otherwise they might strike again. Okay. But I see you don't quite understand, so I'll give you a clear example. If I put him in prison too soon, I may very likely give him, so to speak, moral support. You're laughing? Raskolnikov had no idea of laughing. He was sitting with compressed lips, his feverish eyes fixed on Porfiry Petrovitch's. Yet that is the case, with some types especially, for men are so different. You say evidence. Well, there may be evidence, but evidence, can generally be taken two ways. I'm an examining lawyer and a weak man, I confess it. I should like to make a proof, so to say, mathematically clear. I should like to make a chain of evidence such as twice 2 or 4. It ought to be a direct, irrefutable proof. And if I shut him up too soon, even though I might be convinced he was the man, I should very likely be depriving myself of the means of getting further evidence against him. And how? By giving him, so to speak, a definite position. I shall put him out of suspense and set his mind at rest, so that he will retreat into his shell. They say that at Sevastopol, soon after Alma, the clever people were in terrible fright that the enemy would attack openly and take Sevastopol at once. But when they saw what the enemy preferred a regular siege, they were delighted, I'm told, and reassured, for the thing would drag on for 2 months at least. You're laughing, you don't believe me again. Of course, you're right, too. You're right. These are special cases, I admit. But you must observe this, my dear Rodion Romanovich. The general case, the case for which all legal forms and rules are intended, for which they are calculated and laid down in books, does not exist at all, for the reason that every case, every crime, for instance, so soon as it actually occurs at once, becomes a thoroughly special case and sometimes a case unlike any that's gone before. Very comic cases of that sort sometimes occur. If I leave one man quite alone, if I don't touch him and don't worry him, but let him know or at least suspect every moment that I know all about it and am watching him day and night, and if he is in continual suspicion and terror, he'll be bound to lose his head. He'll come of himself, or maybe do something that will make it as plain as twice 2 or 4. It's delightful. It may be so with a simple peasant, but with one of our sort, an intelligent man cultivated on a certain side, it's a dead certainty. For my dear fellow, it's a very important matter to know on what side a man is cultivated. Then there are nerves. There are nerves, you have overlooked them. Why, they are all sick. Nervous and irritable. And then how they all suffer from spleen. That I assure you is a regular goldmine for us. And it's no anxiety to me. He's running about the town free. Let him walk about for a bit. I know well enough that I've caught him and that he won't escape me. Where could he escape to? Oh, I don't know, literally anywhere else. It was probably even harder in those days to track someone who skipped the country. All they had to do was catch a train, and they could be in who knows where Europe. Like, abroad perhaps? The Pole will escape abroad, but not here, especially as I'm watching and have taken measures. Will he escape into the depths of the country perhaps? But peasants live there, real rude Russian peasants. A modern cultivated man would prefer prison to living with such strangers as our peasants. But that's all nonsense. On the surface, it's not merely that he has nowhere to run, too. He is psychologically unable to escape me. What an expression. Through a law of nature, he can't escape me if he had anywhere to go. Okay, have you seen a butterfly around a candle? That's how he will keep circling and circling around me. Freedom will lose its attractions. He'll begin to brood. He'll weave a tangle around himself. He'll worry himself to death. He'll turn himself in a fit of conscience. What's more, he will provide me with the mathematical proof. If I only give him a long enough interval. He'll keep circling around me, getting nearer and nearer, and then flop. He'll fly straight into my mouth, and I'll swallow him. And that will be very amusing. You don't believe me? Raskolnikov made no reply. He sat pale and motionless, still gazing with the same intensity into Porfiry's face. It's a lesson, he thought, turning cold. This is beyond the cat playing with the mouse, like yesterday. He can't be showing off his power with no motive, prompting me. He is far too clever for that. He must have another object. What is it? It's all nonsense, my friend. You're pretending to scare me. You've no proofs, and the man I saw had no real existence. Simply want to make me lose my head, to work me up beforehand and so to crush me. But you're wrong. You won't do it. Why give me such a hint? Is he reckoning on my shattered nerves? No, my friend, you're wrong. You won't do it even though you have some trap for me. Let us see what you have in store for me. And he braced himself to face a terrible and unknown ordeal. At times he longed to fall on Porfiry and strangle him. This anger was what he dreaded from the beginning. He felt that his parched lips were flecked with foam. His heart was throbbing. But he was still determined not to speak till the right moment. He realized that this was the best policy in his position, because instead of saying too much, he would be irritating his enemy by his silence and provoking him into speaking too freely. Anyhow, this was what he hoped for. No, I see you don't believe me. You think I'm playing a harmless joke on you. Porfiry began again, getting more and more lively, chuckling at every instant, and then again pacing around the room. To be sure, you're right. God has given me a figure that can awaken none but comic ideas in other people. A buffoon, but let me tell you, and I repeat it, excuse an old man. My dear Rodion Romanovich, you are a man still young, so to say, in your first youth, and so you put intellect above everything, like all young people. Playful wit and abstract arguments fascinate you, and that's all for the world like the old Austrian Hofkriegsrath. As far as I can judge of military matters, that is. On paper, they beat Napoleon and taken him prisoner, and there in their study, they worked it all out in the cleverest fashion. But look you, General Mack surrendered with all his army. I see, Rodion Romanovich. You're laughing at a civilian like me, taking examples out of military history. But I can't help it. It's my weakness. I'm fond of military science. I'm ever so fond of reading all military histories. Certainly missed my proper career. I ought to have been in the army. Upon my word, I ought. I shouldn't have been a Napoleon, but I might have been a major. Well, I'll tell you the whole truth, my dear fellow, about this special case. I mean, actual fact in a man's temperament, my dear sir, are weighty matters. It's astonishing how they sometimes deceive the sharpest calculation. I listened to an old man. I'm speaking seriously, Rodion Romanovich. As he said this, Porfiry Petrovitch, who was scarcely 35, actually seemed to have grown old. Even his voice changed, and he seemed to shrink together. Moreover, I'm a candid man. Am I a candid man or not? What do you say? I fancy I really am. I tell you these things for nothing, you don't even expect a reward for it. Well, to proceed, in my opinion, wit is a splendid thing, it is to say, an adornment of nature and a consolation of life, what tricks it can play, so that it sometimes is hard for a poor examining lawyer to know where he is, especially when he's liable to be carried away by his own fancy too, for you know he is a man after all. But the poor fellow was saved by the criminal's temperament, worse luck for him. But young people carried away by their own wit don't think of that when that worst of all obstacles. As you wittily and cleverly expressed it yesterday. He will lie, that is, the man who is a special case, the incognito. He will lie well, in the cleverest fashion. You might think he would triumph and enjoy the fruits of his wit, but at the most interesting, the most flagrant moment he will faint. Of course, there may be illness and a stuffy room as well, but anyway, he's given us the idea. He lied incomparably, but he didn't reckon on his temperament. That's what betrays him. Another time he'll be carried away by his playful wit into making fun of the man who suspects him. He will turn pale as it were on purpose to mislead, but his paleness will be too natural, too much like the real thing. Again, he's given us an idea. Though his questioner may be deceived at first, he will think differently the next day if he's not a fool. Of course, it's like that at every step. He puts himself forward where he is not wanted, speaks continually when he ought to keep silent, brings in all sorts of allegorical allusions. Comes and asks, why didn't you take me long ago? That can happen, you know, with the cleverest man, the psychologist, the literary man. The temperament reflects everything like a mirror. Gaze into it and admire what you see. But why are you so pale, Rodyan Romanovich? Is the room stuffy? Shall I open the window? Oh, don't. And there it was probably ice cold outside. Like, Rodyan, would you like to get a blast of cold air to awaken your senses? Oh, don't trouble, please, cried Raskolnikov, and he suddenly broke into a laugh. Please don't trouble. Porfiry stood facing him, paused a moment, and suddenly he too laughed. Raskolnikov got up from the sofa, abruptly checking his hysterical laughter. Porfiry Petrovitch, he began speaking loudly and distinctly, though his legs trembled and he could scarcely stand. I see clearly at last that you actually suspect me of murdering that old woman and her sister Elizaveta. Let me tell you for my part that I'm sick of this. If you find that you have a right to prosecute me legally, to arrest me, then prosecute me, arrest me. But I will not let myself be jeered at to my face and worried. His lips trembled, his eyes glowed with fury, and he could not restrain his voice. I won't allow it, he shouted, bringing his fist down on the table. Do you hear that, Porfiry Petrovitch? I won't allow it. Good heavens, what does it mean? Cried Porfiry Petrovitch, apparently quite frightened. Rodyan Romanovich, my dear fellow, what is the matter with you? I won't allow it, Raskolnikov shouted again. Hush, my dear man, they'll hear and come in. Just think, what should we say to them? Porfiry Petrovitch whispered in horror, bringing his face close to Raskolnikov's. I won't allow it. I won't allow it, Raskolnikov repeated mechanically. But he too spoke in a sudden whisper. Looks like Porfiry's right. He's like showing him all his cards. Perhaps it is based in ego or something like that. Porfiry turned quickly and ran to open the window. Some fresh air. You must have some water, my dear fellow. You're ill. He was running to the door to call for some when he found a decanter of water in the corner. Come, drink a little, he whispered, rushing up to him with the decanter. It will be sure to do you good. Porfiry Petrovitch's alarm and sympathy were so natural that Raskolnikov was silent and began looking at him with wild curiosity. He did not take the water, however. Rodyan Romanovich, my dear fellow, you'll drive yourself out of your mind, I assure you. Have some water. Do drink a little. He forced him to take the glass. Raskolnikov raised it mechanically to his lips, but set it on the table again with disgust. Yes, you've had a little attack. You bring back your illness again, my dear fellow. Porfiry Petrovitch cackled with friendly sympathy, though he still looked rather disconcerted. Good heavens, you must take more care of yourself. Dmitri Prokofitch was here, came to see me yesterday. I know. I have a nasty, ironical temper, but what they made of it. Good heavens, he came yesterday after you'd been. We dined and he talked and talked away. I could only throw up my hands in despair. Did he come from you? But do sit down, for mercy's sake, sit down. No, not from me. But I knew he went to you and why he went, Raskolnikov answered sharply. You knew? I knew. What of it? Why this, Rodyan Romanovich, that I know more than that about you. I know about everything. I know how you went to take a flat at night when it was dark, and how you rang the bell. Asked about the blood, so that the workmen and the porter did not know what to make of it. Yes, I understand your state of mind at that time. But you'll drive yourself mad like that, upon my word. You'll lose your head. You're full of generous indignation at the wrongs you've received, first from destiny and then from the police officers. So you rush from one thing to another to force them to speak out and make an end of it all, because you're sick of all this suspicion and foolishness. That's so, isn't it? I've guessed how you feel, haven't I? Only in that way you'll lose your head, and Razumhin's too. He's too good a man for such a position, you must know that. You're ill and he's good. Your illness is infectious for him. I'll tell you about it when you're more yourself. But do sit down, for goodness sake. Please rest. You look shocking. Do sit down. Raskolnikov sat down. He no longer shivered. He was hot all over. In amazement, he listened with strained attention to Porfiry Petrovitch, who still seemed frightened as he looked after him with friendly solicitude. But he did not believe a word he said. He felt a strange inclination to believe. Porfiry's unexpected words about the flat had utterly overwhelmed him. How can it be? He knows about the flat, then, he thought suddenly. And he tells it me himself. Yes, in our legal practice there was a case almost exactly similar, a case of morbid psychology, Porfiry went on quickly. Man confessed to murder, and how he kept it up. It was a regular hallucination. He brought forward facts. He imposed upon everyone and why? He had been partly, but only partly, unintentionally the cause of a murder. And when he knew that he had given the murderers the opportunity, he sank into dejection. It got on his mind and turned his brain. He began imagining things, and he persuaded himself that he was the murderer. But at last the High Court of Appeal went into it, and the poor fellow was acquitted and put under proper care. Thanks to the Court of Appeal. Tut, tut, tut. Why, my dear fellow, you may drive yourself into delirium if you have the impulse to work upon your nerves, to go ringing bells at night and asking about blood. I've studied all this morbid psychology in my practice. A man is sometimes tempted to jump out of a window or from a belfry. Just the same with bell ringing. It's an all illness, Rodyon Romanovich. You've begun to neglect your illness. You should consult an experienced doctor. What's the good of that fat fellow? You're lightheaded. You were delirious when you did all this. For a moment, Raskolnikov felt everything going round. Is it possible, flashed through his mind, that he is still lying? He can't be. He rejected that idea, feeling to what a degree of fury it might drive him, feeling that the fury might drive him mad. I was not delirious. I knew what I was doing, he cried, straining every faculty to penetrate Porfiry's game. I was quite myself, do you hear? Yes, I hear and understand. You said yesterday that you were not delirious. You were particularly emphatic about it. I understand all you can tell me. Listen, Rodyon Romanovich, my dear fellow. If you were actually a criminal or were somehow mixed up in this damnable business, would you insist that you were not delirious but in full possession of your faculties? And so emphatically and persistently. Would it be possible? Quite impossible to my thinking. Your reasoning is flawed, Porfiry. Like, if he says, like, I wasn't drunk at the time, I knew what I was doing, he could be the one that did it, by the way. Would it be possible? Quite impossible to my thinking. If you had anything on your conscience, you certainly ought to insist that you were delirious. Claiming insanity or something? That's so, isn't it? There was a note of slyness in this inquiry. Raskolnikov drew back on the sofa as Porfiry bent over him and stared in silent perplexity at him. Another thing about Razumhin. You certainly ought to have said that he came of his own accord to have concealed your part in it. But you don't conceal it. You lay stress on his coming at your instigation. Raskolnikov had not done so. A chill went down his back. You keep telling lies, he said slowly and weakly, twisting his lips into a sickly smile. You're trying again to show that you know all my game, that you know all I shall say beforehand, he said, conscious himself that he was not weighing his words as he ought. You want to frighten me, or you're simply laughing at me. He still stared at him as he said this, and again there was a light of intense hatred in his eyes. You keep lying, he said. You know perfectly well that the best policy for the criminal is to tell the truth as nearly as possible, to conceal as little as possible. I don't believe you. What a wily person you are, Porfiry tittered. There's no catching you. You have a perfect monomania. So you don't believe me. But still you do believe me. You believe a quarter. I'll soon make you believe the whole. Because I have a sincere liking for you and genuinely wish you good. Raskolnikov's lips trembled. Yes, I do, went on Porfiry, touching Raskolnikov's arm genially. You must take care of your illness. Besides, your mother and sister are here now. You must think of them. You must soothe and comfort them, and you do nothing but frighten them. What has that to do with you? How do you know it? What concern is it of yours? You're keeping watch on me and want to let me know it. Good heavens, why, I learnt it all from you yourself. You don't notice anything. You don't notice that in your excitement you tell me and others everything. From Rasmussen, too, I learnt a number of interesting details yesterday. No, you interrupted me. But I must tell you that, for all your wit, your suspiciousness makes you lose the common sense view of things. To return to bell ringing, for instance. I, an examining lawyer, have betrayed a precious thing like that. A real fact, for it is a fact worth having. You see nothing in it. Why, if I had the slightest suspicion of you, I should I have acted like that? No, I should first have disarmed your suspicions, and not let you see I knew of that fact. Should have diverted your attention, and suddenly have dealt you a knockdown blow. Your expression, saying, "And what were you doing, sir, pray, at 10, or nearly 11, at the murdered woman's flat? Why did you ring the bell? Why did you ask about blood? Why did you invite the porters to go with you to the police station? To the lieutenant? That's how I ought to have acted if I had a grain of suspicion of you. I ought to have taken your evidence in due form, searched your lodging, and perhaps have arrested you too. So I have no suspicion of you, since I have not done that. But you can't look at it normally, and you see nothing. I say again." Raskolnikov started so that Porfiry Petrovitch could not fail to perceive it. "You're lying all the while," he cried. "I don't know your object, but you're lying. You did not speak like that just now, and I cannot be mistaken." "I'm lying," Porfiry repeated, apparently incensed, but preserving a good-humored and ironical face, as though he were not in the least concerned at Raskolnikov's opinion of him. "I am lying, but how did I treat you just now? I, the examining lawyer, prompting you and giving you every means for your defense. Illness, I said. Delirium, injury, melancholy in the police officers, and all the rest of it. Though indeed all those psychological means of defense are not very reliable, cut both ways. Illness, delirium, I don't remember. That's all right, but why, my good sir, in your illness and in your delirium were you haunted by just those delusions and not by any others? There may have been others, huh? Raskolnikov looked haughtily and contemptuously at him. Briefly, he said loudly and imperiously, rising to his feet. In so doing, pushed Porfiry back a little. Briefly, I want to know, do you acknowledge me perfectly free from suspicion or not? Tell me, Porfiry Petrovitch, tell me once for all, and make haste. What a business I'm having with you, cried Porfiry with a perfectly good-humored, sly, and composed face. Why do you want to know? Why do you want to know so much, since they haven't begun to worry you? Why you're like a child asking for matches? Why are you so uneasy? Why do you force yourself upon us? I repeat, Raskolnikov cried furiously, that I can't put up with it. With what? Uncertainty? Interrupted Porfiry. Don't jeer at me. I won't have it. I tell you I won't have it. I can't. And I won't. Do you hear? Do you hear? He shouted, bringing his fist down on the table again. Hush, hush, still over here. I warn you seriously, take care of yourself. I'm not joking. Porfiry whispered, but this time there was not the look of old, womanish good nature and alarm in his face. Now he was peremptory, stern, frowning, and for once laying aside all mystification. But this was only for an instant. Raskolnikov, bewildered, suddenly fell into an actual frenzy. But, strange to say, he again obeyed the command to speak quietly, though he was in a perfect paroxysm of fury. Paroxysm is a sudden attack or violent expression of emotion or activity. And that is pretty much a red flag. There was a movie I saw recently called Frozen Ground. And there's a murderer in Alaska called Hansen, apparently. And he's being presented with evidence of his crimes, and he's like, I didn't do it. I wouldn't have done it. Like, you always know when they're shouting that they didn't do it, that they definitely did it. Like, if they can calmly explain how and why it's the case that they didn't do it, that they weren't there, then you know they didn't do it. But if they're getting excited, then you know they're hiding something. Get these done. kind of like what we're seeing with Phoenix Wright. It comes back to the evidence. Okay. I will not allow myself to be tortured, he whispered, instantly recognizing with hatred that he could not help obeying the command and driven to even greater fury by the thought. Arrest me, search me, but kindly act in due form and don't play with me. Don't dare. Don't worry about the form, Porfiry interrupted with the same sly smile, as it were, gloating with enjoyment over Raskolnikov. I invited you to see me quite in a friendly way. I don't want your friendship, and I spit on it. Do you hear? And here I take my cap and go. What would you say now if you mean to arrest me? He took up his cap and went to the door. Won't you see my little surprise? Chuckled Porfiry, again taking him by the arm and stopping him at the door. He seemed to become more playful and good-humored, which maddened Raskolnikov. What surprise? He asked, standing still and looking at Porfiry in alarm. My little surprise. It's sitting there behind the door. He pointed to the locked door. I locked him in that he should not escape. What is it? Where? What? Raskolnikov walked to the door and would have opened it, but it was locked. It's locked. Here is the key. And he brought a key out of his pocket. You're lying, roared Raskolnikov without restraint. You lie, you damned Punchinello. He rushed to Porfiry, who retreated to the other door, not at all alarmed. I understand it all. You're lying and mocking me so that I may betray myself to you. Why, you could not betray yourself any further, my dear Rodion Romanovich. You're impassioned. Don't shout. I shall call the clerks. You're lying. Call the clerks. You knew I was ill and tried to work me into a frenzy to make me betray myself. That was your object. Produce your facts. I understand it all. You've no evidence. You've only rubbishly suspicions like Zamatov's. You knew my character. You wanted to drive me to fury and then to knock me down with priests and deputies. Are you waiting for them? What are you waiting for? Where are they? Produce them. Why deputies, my good man? What things people will imagine? To do so would not be acting in form, as you say. You don't know the business, my dear fellow. There's no escaping form, as you see. Porfiry muttered, listening at the door through which a noise could be heard. Ah, they're coming, cried Raskolnikov. You sent for them. You expected them. Well, produce them all, your deputies, your witnesses. What you like. I am ready. But at this moment a strange incident occurred, something so unexpected that neither Raskolnikov nor Porfiry Petrovitch could have looked for such a conclusion to their interview. And we end on another cliffhanger, yo. That's the end of chapter 5, part 4. Porfiry Petrovitch is gonna be arresting Raskolnikov pretty quick here. We kind of got to see a little bit in this chapter Raskolnikov's questioning. Yeah, he's been running on for a long time. Sooner or later, gotta cut him down. In the words of Johnny Cash. Alright, but that was Crime and Punishment. Hope you've all enjoyed this chapter of the Russian author series. I'll be back with Phoenix and later our exercise and fitness stream. So thank you all for watching.